Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. I'll never forget the night I first swiped right on Declan. His warm smile and sharp jawline popped out at me instantly when his profile appeared. I took my time reading through his bio, noting the witty banter and captivating details that painted a picture of an intelligent, fun-loving guy. He seemed confident yet approachable, exactly my type. I crossed my fingers as I swiped, hoping this enchanting stranger would return the interest. My heart did a little leap when I saw the notification that we had matched. Right away, Declan messaged me, complimenting my photos and asking thoughtful questions about my interests and hobbies. He came across as genuinely interested in learning more about me as a person. Our conversation flowed so naturally that we quickly lost track of time chatting into the night. By the time we finally signed off for the evening, plans had been set to meet up that weekend at a popular bar downtown. Over the next few days, I found myself frequently checking the app, reading Declan's messages, and poring over every detail in his pictures. My anticipation was building, and I took extra care picking out a flirty yet classy outfit for our date. I wanted to look stunning but approachable when I finally came face to face with this digital dreamboat. Arriving at the bar, I did a quick scan of the room before catching Declan's eye as he stood to wave me over. He looked every bit as attractive as his photos, with an added magnetism and charm that the camera failed to fully capture. We embraced in a brief hug, Declan whispering that I looked absolutely stunning in my ear as he pulled back to beam at me. We settled into a cozy booth, and I felt an exhilarating rush of chemistry between us as the drinks began flowing. Declan moved his bar stool closer during conversation, so our knees were just barely touching. He found opportunities to gently graze my arm and gaze right into my eyes as I spoke. It seemed he was hanging on my every word, laughing heartily at my jokes and asking thoughtful follow-up questions. I was completely enamored. By the third round of cocktails, his flirtatious looks and light caresses were impossible to ignore. When he leaned in close, his breath warm against my cheek, and suggested we get out of there, I needed no further convincing. In my whiskey-hazed eagerness, I pushed aside any nagging voices of reason. I wanted this man, and the time for thinking things through had slipped away. We practically raced to grab a cab back to his apartment, hands greedily roaming each other's bodies as we kissed hungrily in the backseat. All sense of propriety vanished the moment we crossed the threshold into his place. In a lust-filled frenzy, clothes were discarded piece by piece as we moved toward the bedroom, eager to fully consummate the fiery attraction we felt. He knew exactly how to touch me, hissing trails down my neck and curves, hitting every pleasure point until I was panting and breathless beneath him. It was animalistic, intense, overwhelming in the most delicious way. Afterwards, I drifted off to sleep, spent and sated in Declan's arms. The next morning, I was awakened by the aroma of coffee and the sound of Declan cheerfully whistling in the kitchen. He had prepared an adorable little breakfast tray, which we enjoyed over easy conversation in bed. I felt pampered and cared for as I reluctantly prepared to leave for my taxi home. Declan assured me he had covered the cab and placed a parting kiss on my lips at the door that left me giddy with thoughts of when I might see this amazing man again. It wasn't until later that week, when my debit card was declined at the grocery store, that the first tendrils of unease unfurled in the pit of my stomach. I immediately checked my account balance and was horrified to find thousands of dollars worth of charges I didn't recognize. Frantic calls to the bank only confirmed my worst fears. Someone had been on a massive spending spree for high-end goods and services using my card. My mind raced, trying desperately to figure out how this could have happened. Nothing made sense until I thought back to that night with Declan, and his access to my purse during our passion-filled frenzy. The realization slowly seeped in that he must have stolen my card and gone on an extravagant 2-day shopping bonanza before cutting off contact. I was nothing but a mark, a conquest, someone to be used for pleasure and profit. The betrayal left me reeling. In my shock and despair, I filed a police report and called the bank to dispute the fraudulent charges. Thankfully, some of the funds were recovered, but I was left with piles of debt to pay back, my credit score in shambles. I was consumed with shame and self-loathing that I had allowed myself to be so thoroughly duped, that Declan had taken advantage of my attraction and trust in such a violating way. I became withdrawn for weeks afterwards, avoiding friends and wallowing in paranoia anytime I needed to make a purchase. The idea of intimacy with another man became unthinkable. I felt tainted by what Declan did, unsure if I could ever open myself up so freely and joyfully again. It took months of slowly picking up the pieces before I finally got the call from police that a breakthrough had been made. Another victim had come forward reporting the exact same scenario with Declan. With her testimony, they were able to track him down and make an arrest. The news washed over me like a cleansing rain, helping restore my faith that there was still good in this world, and I had nothing to be ashamed of. The long road of emotional recovery stretched before me, but knowing that Declan was caught also brought a sense of closure. I had survived the wreckage and come through wiser, stronger, and more cautious when it came to matters of the heart. I hoped someday I could enjoy that breathless thrill of connection again, this time on more guard for those who would seek to abuse it. My Declan ordeal was a painful life lesson, but it would not defeat me or harden my open spirit. I refused to let him steal that too. It all started out innocently enough, just another Tinder match turning into a conversation, turning into agreeing to meet up for a first date. His name was Brad, and we had been messaging back and forth for a couple weeks. He seemed nice at first, if a bit nerdy and awkward in an endearing, harmless way. Or so I thought. When the day of our date finally arrived, I felt equal parts excitement and trepidation, as one does when meeting any online match in person for the first time. You just never know if that effortless banter will translate to real-life chemistry, or what kind of persona they might really have behind the carefully curated profile. But I tried not to let my apprehension get the best of me as I selected an outfit, did my makeup and hair, and finally headed out the door to the park where Brad and I had agreed to meet that sunny Saturday afternoon. I'll never forget the moment I first laid eyes on him standing awkwardly near a picnic table in a Ramones t-shirt and baggy jeans, lanky frame, and unkempt hair looking so similar to his photos. We exchanged stiff pleasantries and began our walk around the pond, diving quickly into that familiar first date rhythm of pointing out our shocking similarities. You love horror movies too. No way. And joking self-deprecatingly about how we hoped we looked like our pics. Things were a bit stilted and surface level at first, but soon we slipped into an easier rapport. We bonded over our shared dark sense of humor and love of all things creepy and macabre. I began to think that maybe, just maybe, this guy could have some real relationship potential. How foolish was I? The first crimson flag came waving violently about 20 minutes into our pondside stroll, when out of nowhere Brad began expounding passionately about body modification culture. I made the mistake of casually mentioning I had been considering getting my nose pierced but was wary of the pain. His eyes lit up with an almost unhinged zeal as he exclaimed, "Oh yeah, no problem, I could totally pierce your nose right now." I nervously laughed it off as an odd joke, but before I could properly react, he was already pulling a rusty safety pin seemingly out of thin air. My first instinct was to run, but morbid curiosity kept me frozen in place as he swiftly jammed the sharp tip straight through the nostril on his left side. I staggered backwards in shock, bile rising in my throat as the wet popping of punctured flesh rang out. Brad didn't even flinch, just threw his head back and let out a hyena-like cackle as blood began gushing from the fresh wound, streaming in red rivulets down over his lip. He grinned maniacally at me then, the flesh around the safety pin already growing puffy and irritated. "See, no big deal. Doesn't even hurt," he declared cheerfully. I was completely dumbfounded in that moment by the nightmarish scene unfolding before me. The date had taken such an extreme turn so jarringly out of the blue. It was like a switch had been flipped in Brad, and suddenly the awkward but harmless guy I had been chatting with online had been replaced by this completely unhinged, violent stranger. Over the white noise ringing in my ears, I distantly heard him continue rambling about the proper way to sterilize needles and how he wanted to start gauging and tattooing himself once he got more experience with DIY piercings. The glint of genuine excitement in his eyes sent a chill down my spine. I muttered some clumsy excuse about an appointment I had suddenly remembered before promptly turning on my heels and speed walking away, willing myself not to break into a full run despite every muscle being taut, poised for flight. I didn't dare to look back, not even when I heard Brad cheerily calling after me to reschedule. The image of his lanky body, mutilated and dripping blood, was seared into my mind's eye, and I knew I would be seen again in Nightmare soon enough. Who knew what that guy was really capable of? He clearly had some deeply disturbing tendencies bubbling just below the surface that I had unwittingly unearthed. My pace didn't slow until I was safely back in the confines of my apartment with the door deadbolted. I sank down against it, finally releasing the panicked tears I had been choking back. Wave after wave of relief that I escaped a clearly unhinged individual mixed with disgust at what I had witnessed and unease about this person who now knew my name and what I looked like roaming free out there. In the aftermath, I turned to my closest friends for support and advice. I also became hyper-vigilant of vetting any future online dates prior to meeting in person. It served as a harsh reminder that you truly don't know what darkness someone may harbor or what they're capable of no matter how harmless they may appear at first glance. The disturbing images from that day haunted me for weeks afterwards. I jumped at every little sound. Certain danger was lurking right around the corner. It took a long time to shake that heightened paranoia and dare to dip my toe back into online dating. When I finally did start swiping again, you better believe I was on high alert for even the faintest whiff of red flags or unhinged tendencies. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. Absolutely not happening after barely escaping the first round unscathed. So in some twisted way, I suppose that horrific first and last date with Brad taught me some hard lessons about being more cautious and trusting my instincts when interacting with relative strangers online. I certainly emerged warier about the darker dangers potentially lurking behind the winking, smiling facade people create on dating sites. A trial by fire experience I came through intact, if not unscathed. Let's just say any enthusiastic offers to self-pierce on the first date were, and will continue being immediate and emphatic unmatches from here on out, though. Once was more than enough first-hand experience with that special brand of horror story for me. Let me tell you, swiping right on Tanya all those years back was the biggest lapse in judgment of my life. Our marriage was a total train wreck from day one. Tanya was insanely possessive and distrustful, interrogating me about my every move. She'd scream at me for glancing in another woman's direction or chatting with a female coworker. I couldn't even have a normal conversation without her accusations of cheating. Of course, the irony is that she turned out to be the unfaithful one in the end. I came home early from work one afternoon to find her in bed with another man. I was out the door and filing for divorce before her panties even hit the floor. I thought cutting ties legally would be the end of my dealings with Tanya. Oh, how wrong I was. For the next 2 years, she periodically resurfaced in my life like a bad penny. Out of the blue, I get these rambling voicemails or texts from her, desperately pleading for me to take her back. When I tried to let her down easy, she'd fly into a vile rage, bombarding me with insults and slurs. His psychotic cycle repeated itself over and over, no matter how clearly I told her to move on. Just when I had lost all faith in finding love again, I matched with Sarah on Tinder. With her compassionate spirit and quirky sense of humor, she was a breath of fresh air after the toxic mess I'd endured with Tanya. Things got serious between us very quickly, and I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with this extraordinary woman. Of course, my felonious ex caught wind of my new relationship in record time. Right after Sarah and I got married, her and all her close friends suddenly started getting friend requests from a suspicious-looking Facebook profile. It didn't take a genius to deduce the fake account was the work of Tanya. Always one to take the high road, Sarah sent her a polite message saying she'd been made and asking her to stop the inappropriate contact. Wouldn't you know it, that phony profile vanished into thin air like Kaiser Soze. Unfortunately, Tanya didn't stop there. Over the next few years, the social media stalking persisted, along with some flat-out real-world stalking too. I'd notice her familiar car parked down the street from our house, but as soon as I walked toward it, she'd peel off. Sarah and I finally took ourselves off social media altogether just to keep some privacy against Tanya's prying eyes. Through the grapevine, I heard she'd gotten hitched again, bizarrely to some poor schmuck with my same first name. But even matrimony couldn't stop Tanya's obsession with me. The crazy escalated to a whole new level when one morning I got a text from an unknown number. The person claimed to be an old hookup asking to meet up for some hanky-panky. Now I knew right off the bat something fishy was up. When I called the mystery number back, low and cold, Tanya's voicemail picked up. I confronted her point blank, but she insisted up and down her phone had been stolen. Yeah, right, lady. The profanity-laced tirade she left in my voicemail told a very different story of her innocence. Over the ensuing weeks, the creepy anonymous texts kept coming at all hours. "I'm watching you. How's my dog? I got in the divorce, by the way." The final straw was a text saying, "You better take good care of that baby." I finally had enough of looking over my shoulder. First, I went to the police, but they said they couldn't do anything about the texts from random numbers. Useless. So I took matters into my own hands and got a restraining order against Tanya. I used her unhinged voicemails and the fake hookup text as evidence. The best part was, with the grounds being I feared for my and my family's safety, the order had to be presented to anyone living with her, meaning her poor sap of a new husband and in-laws would get to see what kind of bunny boiler she was. The only problem now was getting Tanya served with the order. I knew she'd see that coming from a mile away. But Sarah, clever girl, came up with the perfect plan. See, ever since getting a nice camera, Tanya has fancied herself a professional photographer. Sarah direct messaged her posing as a high school senior needing graduation portraits taken at the park. Tanya took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. On the big day, Sarah had a park nearby to watch the takedown go down. I called the process server and directed him to Tanya's location. We listened in on speakerphone as he walked up to her car window and knocked. The confused look on her face when he said, "You've been served," was absolutely priceless. Sarah and I laughed our butts off. As I drove past Tanya sitting stunned in her car, clutching that manila envelope, the shock and recognition on her face filled me with deep satisfaction. Without even opening it, she knew precisely what was inside, and that I had finally put a stop to her harassment. I'm happy to say I haven't heard a peep from Tanya since. I did hear through the grapevine that her Facebook disappeared that very same day. I'm guessing either shame or her new hubby reading the contents of that envelope shut down her profile real quick. So, friends, the moral of the story is, swipe carefully on Tinder. You never know what kind of neuroses might be lurking behind that cute smile and clever bio. I learned that lesson about Tanya the hard way. Here's hoping your right swipes lead you to healthier romances than mine did. I've been chatting with Simon on Tinder for a few weeks, and we really seemed to hit it off right away. He was cute in a nerdy way, with warm brown eyes behind glasses and a great smile. Simon made me laugh constantly with his sarcastic sense of humor and random fun facts he would share. Our conversations flowed easily, and I looked forward to his messages brightening my day. When Simon asked me out, I gladly accepted. For our first date, we met up at a bustling coffee shop downtown. The conversation was just as fun in person as it had been over text. We spent hours talking about everything under the sun, from our favorite books and movies to embarrassing childhood memories. By the time we finally left the coffee shop, my cheeks hurt from laughing and grinning so much. Simon walked me to my car where we exchanged a quick, promising first kiss. For our second date a few days later, Simon planned an outdoor adventure to take advantage of the sunny spring weather. We took a long walk through the sprawling riverside park, stopping to admire the ducks, wildflowers, and views of the city skyline. Then we spread out a picnic blanket and enjoyed the sandwiches, fruit, and wine Simon had packed. We laid back on the blanket gazing up at the clouds, chatting and laughing some more. Simon reached for my hand, interlacing our fingers as we stared at the bright blue sky. I was really starting to like Simon after those first 2 dates. He seemed totally normal, friendly, and as into me as I was into him. When he suggested coming over to his place to share a bottle of wine for our third date, I gladly accepted. Things seemed to be moving along nicely between us, and I felt comfortable enough visiting his apartment after getting to know him better. On the evening of our third date, I took extra care getting ready, blow-drying my long hair, and choosing a flirty sundress to wear. I told my roommate Sarah all about the great guy I was seeing and promised to text her later so she knew I had gotten home okay. "Have fun tonight," Sarah said with a wink as I headed out the door. I arrived right on time at the address Simon had given me, a high-rise building not far from downtown. His apartment was on the 15th floor at the end of a silent hallway with dreary gray carpeting. Inside, the apartment looked tidy but sparsely furnished, with just the basic bachelor pad furnishings. "Make yourself comfortable, I'll grab the wine," Simon said, gesturing me towards an IKEA couch. Simon returned from the kitchen with 2 generous glasses of dark red wine. I've been saving this bottle of Malbec just for tonight," he said with a grin. We clinked our glasses together in a cheers. As we sipped our wine and chatted on the couch, I started noticing the way one of Simon's legs was jittering up and down nervously. He seemed to be drinking his wine awfully fast, too. I tried to ignore the odd vibe creeping into the room. 15 minutes later, the first waves of dizziness hit me. At first, I thought the wine was just going to my head faster than normal, but the room started spinning violently. My limbs felt like lead weights were tied to them, impossible to lift or control. Alarm bells started going off in my foggy mind as I recognized the terrifying sensations. I had been roofied once before in college. Panic flooded my veins as I realized Simon must have slipped something in my wine when he went to pour our glasses. I was in serious danger, alone and drugged in an apartment with a virtual stranger. But I knew I had to keep my wits about me if I was going to escape. Taking a deep breath, I steadied my voice and said as normally as I could, "I'm just going to pop into the restroom for a minute." I managed to get down the hallway without stumbling too much, and locked myself in the bathroom. Hand shaking, I immediately called 911. "Help, I've been drugged on a date, I'm trapped here," I whispered into the phone before collapsing onto the floor. The operator said police were on their way, but I could barely process her words as the room spun and darkness crowded the edges of my vision. I clung to consciousness with all my might, knowing if I passed out, I was at this creep's mercy. From the other side of the door, I could hear Simon yelling and violently rattling the doorknob. The drug was overpowering me with dizzying speed. As the room went black, the last thing I remembered was the sickening thud of my body hitting the tile floor. Everything after that is a blurred collection of fuzzy images and muffled sounds. Brief moments of consciousness punctuated the blackness, bright lights flashing, unfamiliar faces hovering over me speaking in urgent tones, the prick of an IV needle in my arm. I caught snippets of conversation about fluids, vitals, and a toxin screen, but I lacked the energy or awareness to understand what was happening. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, I awoke feeling semi-coherent in a hospital room. A kind police detective was waiting to take my statement. After recounting every detail from meeting Simon on Tinder up until passing out in his bathroom, I worked up the courage to ask why I vaguely recalled someone putting a bag over my head. The detective's face grew very serious. "I'm afraid we had to obscure your vision for your own protection when extracting you from the premises," he said gently. "There were items in the residence that would have been extremely traumatizing for you to see in your condition." A chill ran down my spine at the thought of what sinister plans Simon may have had for me after I was incapacitated. I suddenly felt foolish for ever trusting this man I had met online and barely knew. The detective informed me they had found evidence of at least half a dozen other women Simon had victimized with date rape drugs over the past year. He was arrested and faced a lengthy prison sentence. My terrifying experience taught me just how cautious women need to be when meeting online dates. I now share my story to raise awareness about safety precautions like checking in with a friend, driving separately, watching drinks be poured, and not going to a new date's home right away. While most dating app meetups are benign, predators do hide among the many decent people looking for love online. Always listen to your gut instinct when something feels off. Be prudent protecting yourself until you truly know someone. And never ignore red flags or rationalize away creepy behavior. Your safety is worth more than a misguided sense of politeness. We all want to believe the best in people, but skepticism and caution could end up saving your life. I'm so grateful my instincts kicked in just in time for police to rescue me from a truly chilling fate. I hope my warning helps keep others from meeting the same ending. As a veteran of the peerless online dating scene, I thought I'd seen and heard it all. The fake profiles, the catfishers, the ghosts after one date. That was until the insane night I matched with a girl named Kiki on Tinder. Her photos showed a fresh-faced, girl-next-door type, maybe early 20s, with big doe eyes and a coy smile that hinted at her adventurous side. We started messaging back and forth, just some light flirting at first, but it quickly accelerated. Kiki was clearly aggressive and cut right to the chase about meeting up that very night for some casual fun. In my experience, that kind of directness was a big red flag, but I have to admit my judgment was clouded by excitement. It had been a prolonged dry spell, and the prospect of an easy hookup with a hot young thing was too enticing to turn down hastily. I tried to push down the inner voice in my head, yelling this is too good to be true. Instead, listened to my throbbing manhood urging me to satiate my carnal appetite. Against my better judgment, I agreed to the meat, throwing caution to the wind. He claimed she didn't have a car and asked me to pick her up from a C gas station on the outskirts of downtown. That was red flag number 2, but again, I ignored it, too fixated on the potential prize at the end of this adventure. I borrowed my roommate Cam's car, a fairly new Honda Civic he behaved like it was his child. He's one of those OCD, meticulous types, and he had explicit rules against anyone else driving it. But desperate times call for desperate measures. I figured I'd be in and out on this tawdry tryst, and Cam would be none the wiser. I anxiously headed downtown, anticipation and lust building as I got closer. I pulled off the highway and turned into the gas station where Kiki was supposed to be waiting. It was poorly lit, almost ominous looking. A few rough-looking characters milled about asking for change or cigarettes. Most looked either drunk or strung out, and clearly hadn't bathed in weeks. This was red flag number 3, but there was no turning back now. I parked and scanned the parking lot, looking for Kiki. Just as I was about to text her, a petite girl emerged from the shadows, waving eagerly at me. It had to be her. She scampered over and jumped in my passenger seat, greeting me with a wide grin that showcased a very noticeable gap between her 2 front teeth. I was taken aback briefly because there was no sign of that trait in any of her photos. Up close, I noticed she looked different than I expected, almost malnourished, with sunken cheeks and an alarmingly pale, grayish complexion. She was the opposite of the dewy, thick-haired babe I had envisioned. This was red flag number 4, but with my hormones utterly clouding rational thought, I tamped down the doubt creeping into my mind. Kiki directed me to drive to a motel on the very seaside of town, a crumbling establishment called the Sunshine Inn that looked to be straight out of a horror movie. As we pulled into the mostly deserted parking lot, I surveyed the barred windows and caged exterior walkways. This was clearly a haven for hookers and johns, and likely a drug den to boot. I couldn't believe I was willingly going here, but the prospect of getting laid had utterly blinded me. He seemed unperturbed by our unseemly surroundings as she chattered on nervously about mundane topics like the weather and her love of reality TV. Her breathlessness was evident beneath the too tight tank top she was wearing. I tried not to leer, but couldn't help admiring her perky assets, my excitement growing despite the C logo. We walked towards the specified room number on the 2nd floor as she prattled on, my eyes fixed on her pert behind. Just as we reached the door, she suddenly stopped and exclaimed, "Oh shit, I left my purse in your car." She asked sheepishly if I could give her the keys so she could dash down to grab it, promising to be super quick. I hesitated at first, a little voice inside screaming not to hand over the keys to this veritable stranger. But she seemed so innocent in her request and my guard was down. I relinquished the keys and watched as she scampered back across the dark parking lot and out of view. I stood awkwardly, checking the time on my phone, waiting for her to return. At first I was patient. 3 minutes passed, then 5. But soon 10 minutes had gone by with no sign of her. A sinking feeling hit my gut as I realized I had almost surely been duped. Leaving our room, I rushed back to the lot, but my worst fears were quickly confirmed. Cam's car was gone. In a panic, I angrily tried calling Kiki, but it went straight to a generic voicemail recording. I then phoned Cam, trying in vain to come up with some plausible fiction to explain why I had so foolishly handed his prized car over to a complete stranger. No lie I could conjure sounded believable, though. Utterly crestfallen at my idiocy, I called the police to report the vehicle theft. After hours providing statements, looking through mugshots, and surveilling chop shops, I finally got word that the Civic had been recovered on the south side of the city. I breathed a huge sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. The car had been essentially destroyed, stripped of its rims, the stereo system gone, the interior utterly trashed and spray-painted. Cam was apoplectic when he saw it, spewing expletives and rightly pinning all the blame on me. I couldn't even be mad at him because I knew I deserved it for letting lust utterly cloud my judgment. I promptly deleted my Tinder profile, having learned a very hard lesson about thinking with my smaller head instead of my big head. For a few weeks I was resolved to steer clear of dating apps, too embarrassed about being played for a fool. But inevitably the undeniable urge returned and I downloaded the apps again, albeit this time armed with a newfound wariness and street smarts. I knew I had to be vigilant and ensure a similar lapse in judgment never happened again. When you let carnal cravings override logic, you invariably get screwed, whether literally or figuratively. I just had to remember that moving forward in the perilous jungle of online dating. I still shudder when I think back to my brief entanglement with Brad on Tinder. It seemed so innocent in the beginning, just another dating app match. But behind Brad's striking profile photos and smooth conversational skills lurked a deceitful and manipulative personality. Brad first caught my eye with his rugged outdoorsy photos, hiking rocky trails, kayaking crystal blue waters, standing proudly next to a freshly caught fish. His bio made him seem down-to-earth and adventurous. I was instantly drawn to the contrast between his rugged physique and his thoughtful musings on life. His prompt responses to my introductory messages also grabbed my attention. He actively asked questions and remembered little details I had mentioned. Within the first week, Brad and I shifted our conversation from Tinder to texting. The constant ping of new messages on my phone became a comforting ritual, like connecting with an old friend. We just seemed to get one another, bonding over niche interests like microbreweries, obscure documentaries, and outdoor photography. The more we interacted, the more enthusiastic I became. He was charming yet genuine, neither overly flattering nor too reserved. My imagination ran wild, picturing an exciting first date. 2 weeks after our initial match, Brad suggested meeting up at a trendy new restaurant downtown. He wanted to check out their craft cocktail program. I wanted to check out him. We set a time, and I immediately dove into my pre-date beauty regimen, exfoliating, tweezing, styling my hair in loose waves. I chose a flirty yet casual black wrap dress and heels, wanting to look chic but approachable. The morning of the date, nervous excitement propelled me out of bed early. To calm my nerves, I went for a long jog on the wooded trail near my apartment. The fresh air helped clear my spinning mind. Afterwards, time seemed to move excruciatingly slowly as I watched the clock tick down to our meeting. To avoid just waiting around, I decided to do a trial run of the drive so I wouldn't get lost. Sure enough, downtown weekend traffic was a bear, and I was glad I now knew which lanes and turns to take. Pulling up to the restaurant precisely on time, I parked and rushed to check my reflection in the visor mirror. My makeup had survived intact, and my waves had a touch of tousled volume. After a deep breath, I walked inside and immediately spotted Brad seated at the bar. He looked just as handsome as his photo suggested, with a strong jawline and intense gaze. When we made eye contact, a grin spread across his face. He stood up and enveloped me in a friendly hug. His woodsy cologne tickled my nose, and his stubble grazed my cheek. Sitting across from Brad, conversation came even easier than via messaging. He maintained comfortable eye contact as we discussed work, friends, pop culture, and more. No awkward silences or strained jokes. Everything just flowed naturally. Halfway through the charcuterie board, Brad nudged his knee against mine beneath the table. The subtle contact sent tingles up my leg. He definitely seemed interested. After dinner, we decided to keep the date going by grabbing cocktails at a lively bar downstairs. We sat side by side on stools chatting for hours. Our bodies inched progressively closer until his arm rested behind me. Around midnight, Brad gently turned my chin and kissed me. I nearly melted onto the floor. It was perfect, confident yet tender. Over the following week, giddy butterflies filled my stomach constantly. Brad and I messaged nonstop about how great it felt to find each other. He was just as excited as me for date number 2, a romantic picnic in the park. Things were moving quickly, but it all felt so natural. Too good to be true, the cynical voice in my head warned. One lazy Saturday afternoon, I noticed an unfamiliar number calling with my local area code. Normally, I don't answer unrecognized calls, but something compelled me to pick up. An angry woman's voice instantly started yelling about me needing to stay away from Brad. She claimed to be his roommate and said he already had a serious girlfriend. I shouldn't interfere in their relationship. Before I could even respond, she hung up. Stunned, I checked my text but saw no mention of a roommate from Brad. When I asked him about it, he brushed it off as his delusional roommate harassing him again. He said she had major mental health issues, including fabricating an obsession with him. Brad said not to worry. She was making the whole thing up. Though a bit puzzled, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. But over the next few weeks, the bizarre calls kept happening, each with increasing intensity. The woman unraveled more details about Brad's alleged lies and manipulations. She said they had moved here together from the Midwest under suspicious circumstances. Brad wasn't even an American citizen. He had entered illegally and planned to marry me for citizenship papers. Though initially inclined to trust Brad, seeds of doubt had been planted. But each time I tentatively brought up his roommate's claims, Brad adamantly denied them. He insisted she was a stalker obsessed with ruining his life. To alleviate my concerns about his citizenship, he even showed me a U.S. passport. I started second-guessing my own judgment and paranoid instincts. One evening, I decided to drive by Brad's apartment unannounced. A friend suggested I needed solid proof whether this girlfriend really existed or not. As I parked on the street, my hands shook with nerves. Before I even approached the front door, it swung open. Out walked a tall brunette who fit the angry caller's voice, Brad's alleged girlfriend. Shocked, I stood frozen as she introduced herself and began calmly explaining their convoluted situation, including their 5-year relationship ruse to get citizenship papers. Like puzzle pieces clicking into place, suddenly everything made sense. The increasing intensity of her calls, Brad's smooth explanations and reassurances after each one. He had been gaslighting me the whole time. This woman had been trying to warn me to expose Brad as a serial manipulator, but he knew how to make me doubt myself. In just a few weeks, he had gained my trust and affection through deception. It was all a hoax. In the following weeks, I fell into a depression blaming myself. I felt like such a fool for ignoring the blatant red flags. But Brad was a master con artist who preyed upon my openness and optimism. The charming, adventurous man I thought I knew had been a crafted illusion. No wonder his affections had rushed forward so quickly. He had an agenda. The experience with Brad left me scared, wary of trusting again. But it also taught me the subtle signs of deception that I was too foolish to recognize before. I am now much more guarded with my heart and watch for inconsistencies in other stories. As painful as it was, surviving Brad's sinister duplicity gave me new relationship wisdom. I now balance openness with discernment, protect myself while still giving the benefit of the doubt. The charming ones often do hide the most, but there are sincere hearts out there too. It's just a matter of learning to spot the difference. I've been using Tinder for a few months with not much luck. Most of my matches either fizzled out after a few messages or turned out to be duds in person. So when I matched with VIII, I was cautiously optimistic. His photos showed a tall, dark, and handsome guy with olive skin and piercing green eyes. His bio said he was a world traveler originally from Turkey. We started messaging and really hit it off right away. Adam was an excellent conversationalist over text. He asked thoughtful questions about my job, family, and hobbies. He made witty observations that had me laughing out loud. He even dropped little compliments here and there that made me blush. After 2 weeks of daily messaging, I was hooked. Adam seemed totally genuine, and I couldn't wait to meet him in person. We had a plan to meet for sushi, one of my favorite foods. I took extra care getting ready, gently curling my long hair and applying makeup with a precise hand. I decided on a floral sundress and tan wedges, wanting to look cute but casual. As I drove to the restaurant, butterflies danced in my stomach. When I arrived, Aiden was already seated with a drink. He looked just as handsome as his photos, if not more so. His sharp jawline and full lips belonged on a magazine cover. He had a worldly air about him, like he contained untold adventures and wisdom. When Aiden smiled and greeted me, I nearly melted. Things went swimmingly at first. We sat side by side, so our knees occasionally brushed under the table, sending tingles up my leg. He asked how my week had been and looked intently into my eyes as I caught him up on work projects and friend drama. We toasted with sake as the conversation flowed easily. We both loved obscure foreign films, had visited many of the same countries, and shared a passion for literary fiction. It was refreshing to click with someone so quickly. Then gradually, subtly, the tone started to shift. When I laughed at a childhood memory he shared, Adam commented that my laugh reminded him of a little girl's. I brushed it off, though the comparison gave me pause. We got onto the subject of family, and Adam mused about one day having a daughter of his own. But then he said he would want to keep her innocent forever, that he'd be jealous as she loved any man but her daddy. I swallowed my discomfort and changed the subject. Later, as I was telling a story, Adam abruptly cut me off. He was staring at my hands on the table and informed me I could no longer wear nail polish now that we were dating. He claimed the scent had bothered him, and he hated the feeling of polish against his skin when holding hands. I was so stunned I just murmured that I'd keep that in mind. By the time our sushi was gone, the conversation had taken an even more disturbing turn. Adam was fixating on the idea of my body aging, saying he found wrinkles and cellulite repulsive. But he reassured me with a patronizing pat on the hand that we could still sleep together, if we kept the lights off to hide my flaws. I sat there staring at numb anger and shame rising in my chest. The frightened attraction I'd felt toward Adam had evaporated. Now I saw the manipulative, controlling monster underneath the handsome exterior. I needed to shut this date down and get as far away from this man as possible. My skin was crawling just sitting next to him. The final straw came when the check arrived. Despite having ordered twice as much food and expensive steak, Adam calmly announced we should split the bill right down the middle. I threw down enough cash to cover my share, grabbed my purse, and strode out of the restaurant without a word or backwards glance. I drove home in a daze, feeling violated after being subjected to Adam's disturbing attitudes all evening. The guy who had seemed so worldly and charming over text had turned out to be a judgmental creep the moment we met in person. I was kicking myself for not picking up on the red flags sooner. My friends were horrified when I recounted what happened with Adam. They validated my feelings and reminded me I'd done nothing to deserve or provoke his warped attitudes. I deleted and blocked Adam everywhere to avoid any more contact. I knew I was lucky to have escaped relatively unscathed. Though shaken, I didn't let one awful date turn me off dating for good. A few months later, once I regained confidence in myself, I re-downloaded Tinder. This time I made sure to video chat with any matches first to screen for red flags. I listened to my gut and didn't ignore any uneasy feelings about someone's behavior. I knew what to watch out for now. And eventually, I did meet a kind, respectful guy who treated me right. We took things slow, and when I was ready, I told him about Adam so he would understand my reservations. I'm so glad I didn't settle and instead held out for someone worthy of my trust. My Tinder horror story has a happy ending after all. My brother Mike has always been addicted to swiping right on Tinder. The guy will chat up and meet literally any woman that matches with him on the app. I swear his right thumb must be double the size of his left from all of that mindless swiping. Most of the time his dates and hookups are harmless flings that don't amount to anything. But this one girl he met on Tinder about a year ago turned out to be a total stalker psycho. Mike had matched and been messaging with this chick named Amanda for a couple weeks before they finally set up a date at a bar downtown. According to Mike, she seemed totally normal and even kind of sweet at first. They hit it off right away over drinks and ended up heading back to our house later that night since our parents were out of town. I remember him sneaking her into the house around midnight, both of them giggling and falling over each other drunk. They headed straight for his bedroom and didn't emerge again until Amanda snuck out at dawn while the rest of us were still asleep. For Mike, a random hookup disappearing early in the morning wasn't unusual behavior. He never tried to pursue most of his Tinder girls beyond a one-night stand. But Amanda, it turns out, had other plans than a simple one-and-done fling. About 2 weeks after their hookup, my mom went out to our backyard camper to grab a few lawn chairs for a barbecue we were having. When she opened the camper door, she found the place had been completely taken over by a stranger's belongings. Rooms and clothes were strewn everywhere. Half-eaten bags of chips and candy were dumped out on the countertops, and a pair of hideous pink fox fur Uggs sat in the middle of the floor that definitely didn't belong to anyone in our family. My mom sprinted back inside to confront all of us about the mysterious camper squatter. Mike swore up and down he had no clue who could have broken in and left all their stuff there. He seemed genuinely shocked when my mom described the girly clothes and shoes strewn about. But of course, Mom didn't fully believe him. She knew Mike brought home girls from Tinder all the time, so it wasn't a reach to suspect this was maybe some chick he was hooking up with on the down low. Even after interrogating Mike, she still decided to call the police just to report the possible homeless squatter. Within 15 minutes, a couple of cop cars pulled up with a team of officers ready to investigate. The 4 officers spread out around the camper, taking photos of the scattered clothes and food packets while also dusting for fingerprints near the entrance. After about an hour of combing through everything, they confirmed it was indeed a woman's belongings, and she appeared to have been staying there sporadically based on the makeshift bedding area she had set up on the floor. Things like jewelry, makeup, and toiletries also indicated a female squatter, but beyond that, there were no clues about the mystery woman's identity. That is, until one of the officers spotted a small Ziploc bag tucked under the mattress with some kind of powdery residue in it. He called over the head officer, who did a quick test and verified it was likely the remains of crushed up pills or illegal drugs of some kind. Now the police were nearly certain whoever had been secretly staying here was likely into some shady stuff. As the officers kept searching, they eventually uncovered a crumpled up receipt from a convenience store for some cigarettes and energy drinks. And there, printed clearly on the receipt, was the name Amanda Peters. My mom's jaw dropped when she saw that familiar name printed there in black and white. She immediately pulled Mike aside again, demanding to know if he knew an Amanda. At first, Mike played dumb, pretending he didn't recognize the name. But after a few minutes of grilling from both my mom and the suspicious cops, he finally cracked. He admitted that Amanda was in fact the Tinder date he brought home several weeks prior. But he swore up and down he had no idea she'd been living in the camper or doing drugs or anything creepy like that. In his mind, she was just a one-night stand, and that was it. The cops were able to pull up Amanda's records and discovered she actually had a warrant out for a recent drug possession charge. And this wasn't her first offense either. She had multiple previous trespassing and burglary charges on her rap sheet too. The head officer gave my mom a grave look and told her she was incredibly lucky they had caught on to this woman's sneaky behavior before she could have done real harm. As Mike stood there looking guilty and dumbfounded, the officers put out an all-points bulletin for Amanda, warning she was likely still in the area and possibly armed. It only took them about 2 days before they tracked her down, attempting to sneak into another home several blocks away. She tried to make a run for it, but the cops swiftly wrestled her to the ground and cuffed her. Once in custody, Amanda confessed to breaking into our backyard camper to sleep there on and off ever since she met Mike. She snuck in through the side fence late at night after we were all asleep and would leave right at sunrise. She said she saw Mike as her soulmate after their one amazing night together and wanted to stay close to him, even if he didn't know she was there. She insisted she wasn't stalking him exactly, but that she just needed to feel a spiritual connection by being near him. Needless to say, we were all completely disturbed and terrified by Amanda's bizarre obsession with Mike. This random Tinder girl had essentially been stalking him for weeks without any of us picking up on it. Who knows what else she might have been plotting in her deranged mind all that time hiding out in the shadows. Thankfully, the cops were able to apprehend her before the stalking got even worse. She ended up getting sent to jail for several months to await her separate drug charges. Plus, my mom got a restraining order against her ever coming near our house again, just to be safe. As for my brother Mike, he immediately deleted his Tinder account and swore off online, dating indefinitely after that. Can't say I blame him. I couldn't imagine how violated and freaked out he must have felt knowing that Amanda had been lurking right outside his bedroom this whole time. It was like something out of a horror movie. And even I have been wary of meeting anyone online ever since witnessing that insane stalker situation go down. You really never know who might be on the other side of that innocuous Tinder profile. They may seem endearing at first, but end up being a total psycho.